When John Sanchez leaves East Side House Settlement in December, he'll be departing an organization that he's led for 27 years. The organization has an $18 million budget, about 450 educators, counselors, and social workers, serving 10,000 residents across Upper Manhattan and the Bronx. It has a major role offering programs to senior citizens, children, and a lot of other people. Thank you for sitting with us. Thanks for being here.
You're welcome. I'm delighted to be with you.
So East Side House has a long history going back to 1891. When you took over East Side House 27 years ago, Ed Koch, I think, was in his last year as mayor. What's changed over that time, and what's kind of remained the same?
Well, a lot has changed. Time flies by very, very quickly. Mott Haven, where we're headquartered, is within the poorest congressional district in the country. So one thing that hasn't changed is that statistic. It is still the poorest congressional district in the country. It was in 1989. There are signs that things are getting better economically. The community is somewhat more diverse. There is more private housing now in the area. There is a loft community, an artist community that has come in south of Bruckner Boulevard. But the immediate community there is anchored by 4 major public housing developments, so that the misery index, if you will, is still amongst the highest in the city of New York. What's changed is demographics. Within public housing, the demographics remain fairly constant, i.e. African American people with roots in this country, Latino people with roots in Puerto Rico largely. But now, 27 years later, the African American community is still within public housing, but we have seen a fairly large influx of West African people, and also the Latino portion of the community is changing, and we have far more Mexicans now than we did in 1989, and some Dominicans. So within that Latino portion and in the West African portion, a lot of those folks are not documented, so they're not eligible for public benefits. So if anything, the misery index within that segment of the population has gotten worse.
Clearly, being at an organization for such a long time, how do you develop your management style? What's sort of how do you take the helm of such a large organization?
Well, some of it is on-the-job training. I think I'm a better leader now than I was in 1989, and some of it is necessity. We develop our own team by and large. We promote from within. Colloquially, we say we grow our own. In 1989, that was a necessity. If you're a young man, so I don't know if you remember the South Bronx in 1989, but we were in the throes of the crack epidemic. And when I wanted to hire people, it was very hard to get folks from outside of the South Bronx to want to come up and work in that area. So by necessity, we had to look from within the community. Fortunately, being poor doesn't mean you lack capacity or potential. So we've always been able to find competent people. So we've grown our own. We provide, in a very focused and disciplined way, training, study time for people to go to school, to get people to up their game, as it were, both in terms of their formal educational training as well as their on-the-job skill sets. The man who is succeeding me as our associate executive director, he lives in the Bronx. He's raising his kids in the Bronx. He has skin in the game. He came to us 12 years ago with minimal experience in the not-for-profit industry, as it were. But he's gone up the ladder. He's received 3 or 4 promotions, so he knows the business from the ground up. We have a lot of other folks in positions of responsibility, some of whom were in our youth leadership program. Others graduated from what was then known as the GED program. So we are constantly looking for talent, both within the community but also outside of the community. We get many social work students that pass through Eastside House. Off mic, we talked a little bit about our director of social development, who's a Fordham grad, but she started at Eastside House 6 years ago as a student intern, and we recognize talent and have kept her.
What would you say are some of the most pressing challenges that you tend to deal with more regularly?
So the challenges are varied, right? So from a management perspective, we are, of course, in the not-for-profit industry, which is a stressed industry. We've grown significantly over the last 6 years. So one stressor or one source of worry is how fast do you grow and in what directions? And that's really driven by economics. Not-for-profit agencies are not reimbursed the full amount of the services for which they contract. So if I'm building a tank for the Defense Department, I get the cost of the tank, I get an indirect cost rate, and then I get a profit margin. If I'm running a settlement house like Eastside House, I don't even get the full cost of the service. Forget the indirect cost or any, we're not for profit, obviously, but there's no margin. So one has to gauge very carefully the contracts one accepts with a view towards what's sustainable. And that equation relies a lot on how much private money you're raising. Because by definition, if your funders are not giving you enough to pay for what you're doing, you still have to pay for what you're doing. You have to pay your staff. So we look at what we're able to generate from the private sector to supplement that public portion, and one always has to weigh how much of the public portion do you take before you outstrip your private capacity to support it.
We've been hearing about these funding issues, especially for social services nonprofits, for a while. It's a big issue now. I'm wondering, we were talking about sort of the development of Eastside House, and how long has this been a problem? I'm sure funding is always an issue, but has it always been as dire? Or?
Well, I think that sequentially, we're quasi-public agencies now, many of us, by and large. I think the problem has been exacerbated during my tenure at Eastside House, primarily because government, whether it's local or state or even federal, has increasingly relied on the not-for-profit sector. We're on the ground, we know the community, we can get stuff done. Two, we do the stuff cheaper. But we've gotten to a point where that doing the stuff cheaper is beginning to work very much against us in terms of sustainability and our capacity to do all that's asked of us. So in 1989, there was an internet, but it wasn't widely used. There was email as an experiment someplace. In 2016, there is an internet, there is email, there is increasing demand to use our technological infrastructure to capture our results, to report to our funders, but nobody pays for that. So you have to go and find the money to do the servers and to do the desktops and to hire the people that know how to deal with that stuff and can do it accurately. 27 years ago, that wasn't a cost center. Today it is. We have to figure out how to pay for it.
I asked earlier about some of the challenges, and in terms of some of the successes, you've been involved in some of the community schools, kind of partnering inside of public schools, especially I believe they're in South Bronx and Manhattan.
That's correct.
Where do you see the community schools movement going? What direction do you see the community schools progressing, and what have you seen in our schools?
The community school movement mirrors the philosophy that Eastside House has had since 1891. For those communities that are fortunate to have a settlement house that is functional and has capacity, that's a center for civic, social life as well as a center for service. For many, many years, many of us lamented the fact that public schools, which are in every community, basically closed at 3. That's a bit of an overstatement, but they were not centers for civic, social, as well as services beyond education. I think the community school movement is beginning to change that equation. I believe that if it gets enough time to plant roots, it will develop a following in the communities that it serves. And that means that there will be political pressure to keep the movement going and to keep using those buildings for more than 8, the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. So I have high hopes for the community school movement. I think the mayor is right to focus on it and to build upon it, and we're very happy to be a part of that effort.
And you have, you've mentioned you were one of our guests at our OpCon event earlier this year, and then you mentioned that Eastside House has a lot of relationships with the government. You do most, if not all, of your work in the schools, like the community schools, or in public housing facilities. How important is that partnership with the city and the state, and what sort of advice would you give to organizations seeking to kind of improve their relationships with the city?
So I would just step back a minute and say, because we're multi-service, we have Head Start and daycare, now called Early Learn. You referenced the senior centers in your prior comment. We have a very successful workforce development component with the Human Resources Administration. So we have a very broad portfolio of services to people of all ages, and government is our key partner in doing that, in addition to private philanthropy, which, as I explained earlier, makes possible the work that we do with our government partners. First lesson is you got to deliver quality. It's one thing to talk about serving a community and helping people enter the economic mainstream, help young people who are challenged educationally to get a degree, get into college, but you've got to actually do it, and you've got to be able to demonstrate that you have done it. That, I think, validates for our government partners our value and the investment they make in our work. It also leads to my second point. If you're going to be a locally driven service provider, you've got to have a following in your community or communities. The people that live in the public housing developments, the people that live in the tenements, the parents of the kids that you're working with have to see you as being for real, being honest, and being competent. And in that way, if they see you that way, then you're able to bridge your government partner with the community so that they work hand in hand. And if we're missing a beat in either the approach we're taking in a community, we can help the community communicate to government, this is where you're falling short, or this is the service that's needed that you're not providing. You need to provide it. So those are the two key aspects from my vantage point: competence, results, and then partnership not only with government but with the people that we're serving in the communities in which we're providing the service.
And I think we have time just for one or two more questions. Associate Executive Director Daniel Diaz is taking over your role. In terms of succession planning, what do you do to sort of ensure the mission of the organization is remains the same, and that you can maintain the confidence of donors and staffers, throughout that term.
So the first thing that comes to mind that we haven't discussed, we are a private nonprofit agency, so we have a board of directors of private citizens who volunteer their time, energy, and money to further our work. And they're the driving force. We've done several strategic plans. The last one just concluded this year, heavily involving the board, obviously led by the board, actually. So your observation about remaining true to the mission is really a key factor for the board of directors to keep us all in line. So we do a strategic plan roughly once every 5 years. We revisit that mission and make sure that what we're doing is in line with the mission. If there are changes in the community and we have to tweak the mission, then we go ahead and tweak it. Succession is a discipline. Or succession planning is a discipline. Every year we kick off our program year with a large meeting of the staff, of the middle management and upper management. And my directive to them is, part of your job is to find the person that's going to succeed you if you get promoted or if you find an opportunity elsewhere. I'm not expecting that people that we hire are going to spend 28 years at Eastside House, as I will have at the end of the year. There are opportunities. We're a fairly large organization, but it's a flat organization, so competent people are going to want to pursue their careers. So as a discipline, as I explained earlier, we get students, we get people that graduate from our high schools, go to college, and come back for a summer job, and we're constantly looking for folks who we can bring onto the team, train them up, put them on the bench, and as folks move on, we've got a conveyor belt. Sounds a little bit too impersonal, but we've got a ladder that people can climb at Eastside House.
And what really quickly, what advice are you giving Daniel Diaz? What are you telling him? How does he keep the ship steady?
Well, he's a very, very competent man. So my advice is more macro in nature, and it goes back to a comment I made earlier. A lot of what we do is made possible by our board of directors and by private philanthropy. So that you cannot take your eye off those two balls, because if you do and something is miscommunicated, then you're not able to go to your public partner with the capacity and the backup funding that it takes to deliver on the assignments they give to us.
Right. Well put. So we were here with John Sanchez from Eastside House Settlement, and thank you very much for listening to New York Nonprofit Media Podcast.